Welcome to the Veterinary Financial Podcast, where we discuss financial freedom and whole life success. I'm Meredith Jones, a veterinarian and financial planner.
And I'm Willie Bidat, a lab animal specialist and a money nerd. So today we have another episode where Meredith and I will be discussing one of the hot topics in the Debt-Free Vets group, which is budgeting. And I think most people, the first question is the application that they can use for budgeting, but we should start as to why is it important to budget overall. Personally, for me, this is the way I started. It's how my mind is set up is I want to know where my money's going. I love using Excel. I love doing tables. Whenever I spend my money, I'm like, what happened this month? Where did everything go? Or monthly, yearly, whatever. Some people do not like the word budget. So Meredith has an alternate, phrase for it, which would be the cash flow plan. Mm-hmm. Why is budgeting important, Meredith?
Well, budgeting is important because it's really the foundation of a lot in personal finance, right? Because if you don't know where your money is going, then it's going to be much harder to hit your financial goals, both with saving, investing, paying down debt, any financial goal that you have, buying a house, starting to practice, anything. Really, the first thing that is going to be a foundation is your budget. And so, if you don't know where your money is going, then you're going to have a hard time hitting those goals. So you're right. Yeah, a lot of people don't like the word budget and they kind of cringe when anybody says the word budget because then people think, gosh, somebody's going to tell me not to buy lattes, right? And so it's not really about that, right? So it's not a scarcity mindset where it's like, oh, I can't spend and I've got to, really buckle down. Like that's not the feeling that I want people to have when they're looking at where their money is going, right? So the cash flow plan, it has a better connotation to it. It's more of like an abundance mindset. It's like, okay, I've got control over my money and I can decide where it's going.
Yeah, those lattes do get expensive. I was in the airport 2 days ago and I told my wife, you know what? I want a coffee. All of a sudden, I asked her to order the coffee through the Starbucks app. And it's like, why is it $20 for 2 coffees?
Oh, no.
Like that's, but whatever, that's life.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that must have been that extra airport price. Gosh, $20 for... You didn't get any food with that, Willie?
No, just 2 coffees.
Oh, dang. But yeah, if you like lattes, if you want to spend $10 on a latte, put it in your budget. Have it be something that's, in this case, maybe part of the travel budget, right, Willie?
Yeah, travel or restaurant. Right now, they're probably both merged because I spend a lot more in restaurants when I'm traveling.
Yeah, for sure. And really, when you're looking at this, okay, what's the point, at a higher level, right? It's really about designing your financial plan around what is most important to you. So your short-term goals, your long-term goals. So when I'm talking about short-term goals, I'm meaning saving so you can actually take a vacation, right? So you can take a break and come back refreshed and more excited to get back to work because you had a real break. Having an emergency fund, having some security, knowing that if something happened, if your car broke down or something happened with your job situation, you would have some backup money and still be able to pay your basic bills and have some money to eat with, right? Long-term goals. So home ownership, if you want to be a practice owner in the future, some folks already have a home, but they want to buy a bigger piece of land and have horses or have a hobby farm. There's so many different things that you can design your financial plan and your budget around. And so designing it so that you can really actually hit those savings goals.
Yeah, student loans, I think it's a big one that triggers a lot of people for that budget question. At least for me, it was one. That's why I started in this journey. It was, how do I tackle the student loans? And then, okay, where's my money going? What do I need to do?
Yeah, exactly. And if you're going for long-term forgiveness, it's like, okay, well, how do I budget for my student loan payment and then also for the tax bomb, the tax bill that's going to be due at the end of that 20 to 25 year timeline? And that's something that when I'm talking with clients about financial planning, that's something that we talk about building into the budget as well.
And so you mentioned emergency fund, and you always talk about 2 levels. What are those 2 levels of emergency fund?
Yeah, so the 2 levels of emergency fund. So level 1 is just your basic emergency fund. And this is even if you're a vet student, or you're very early in your career. So this is going to come out where we've got some brand new grads, right? Like we at least want you to have an emergency fund that is at the starter level. And so that's between $3,000 and $5,000. So if you don't have $3,000 to $5,000 in your emergency fund, then that's going to be what you're going to want to set aside as your first goal. And I would put that emergency savings into a high yield savings account. Those are sitting between 4 and 5%. I'm seeing more and more that are at 5% currently as we're recording this, but that's going to be a great place to save. And then level 2 is 3 to 6 months of expenses. And so how do you know what your 3 to 6 months of expenses should be?
With a cash flow plan or a budget. Yeah, so that's how you would know what you're spending on a monthly basis. You, of course, you can be spending, let's say, $10,000 a month, but certainly if there's any economic downturn, you know what is essential. So I think, Meredith, how do you plan the budget? Either essential or where you're actually spending at the moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, because you could look at it 2 different ways as far as how to calculate that. You could look at your current spending, or you could pare it down to the very most essential expenses and say, okay, well, if something really happened with my job, I wouldn't eat out, in restaurants at all. And so I would just cut that out. So you can do that on a practical level. I'm not doing it that way. So I'm usually actually looking at their current expenses. Sometimes there's something that's obvious that you could cut out of that's like totally non-essential. But usually when I'm calculating that and helping a client with it, I'm just looking back at, okay, what did they spend over the last quarter? Divide that out over the average month, and then use those expenses as the target for the 3 to 6 months of expenses. And if that makes it so that it's a little bit more than it has to be, then personally I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So once you build this emergency fund, and this is a situation that I'm going through right now, so I have a very hefty emergency fund. What I used to think was after that, I'm going to go invest the rest of the money. I don't need to put more money into the emergency fund. But with the interest rate from a bank giving me 5% on my money back, and it's pretty much guaranteed, I've been actually putting a lot more money into, it's really a savings account. It went from the emergency fund to now a big savings account. But what would you tell people about that? Is it okay to continue building that emergency fund or even putting more money into your savings account, or they should just go ahead and invest?
Yeah, good question. So I think it depends on what your goals are. So it's going to be very individual from one person to another, but I have clients who have a lot of goals that are savings goals that are things that they want to accomplish in the next 4 or 5 years or 3 to 5 years. And so it's like, okay, if it's going to be in the next 5 years, then we're probably putting that money into a high yield savings account and just building that up. Like if you put that into, for example, a brokerage account, like a non-retirement investment account, if you put the money in there, then it's going to be exposed to the ups and downs in the stock market. And maybe that property comes along for your horse, right? Then maybe when that opportunity comes along, you're not going to have the money there. And so if it's something that is a short-term goal, then yeah, I'm looking at high yield savings account. If it's a longer-term goal, so definitely if it's like 10 plus years out, then you're going to typically be better off putting that into investments, and kind of in between 7-8 years is going to probably depend on what their financial picture looks like otherwise.
Okay, so hopefully we have made a good argument for people to start having a cash flow plan.
Yes.
So the main question is usually, what tool do I use, or what application in the age of technology? And I have a few. I'm familiar with some that I've tried to use. But again, if anybody has experience with them, feel free to message us. I would love to hear your experience with budget apps, because certainly that's a common question. So one of them is You Need a Budget, YNAB. I've used this application. I only use it for a few months. It's great. It's been out there for years. So it seems to be a very reliable budgeting application. Monarch Money, I frankly haven't used it. Meredith, do you have an experience with Monarch Money?
Yeah, Monarch Money is the one that I currently use. And so I really like it because, so I like YNAB too. But I think there's a little bit more of a learning curve to YNAB, and they have lots of tutorials, but it's like you need the tutorials versus Monarch Money. People can usually easily connect their accounts to it, and it's just ready to go. It has very easy to use reports. You can categorize your expenses pretty easily. And so I really like that one because I think it's a little bit more user friendly. And then what's this Copilot one that you've got on our list here?
I used Copilot because one of the podcasts that I really enjoyed, they had a 2-month trial. So I said, I'm going to use it. It's great. It's easy to use. It has an AI system which tries to categorize your expenses. Unfortunately, I do not have a Mac. It only comes for either Mac or iPhone. I do have an iPhone. I personally do not enjoy adding my bank account information and whatnot in the phone. I feel like it was a little bit more complicated than just using it in my computer. Yes, I'm a Microsoft guy.
We'll forgive you.
I do have a question about Monarch Money. Is there a fee to Monarch Money?
There is, yeah. There's a free trial. I think it's about 30 days. And then last I checked, they still had a special going for people who are sad about Mint.com not being a thing anymore. They were giving them 50% off the first year. And so you can check that out. I think that is still around. But yeah, there is a monthly or yearly fee for Monarch Money as well as YNAB.
Yeah, the reason I asked, so Copilot as well. So the 3 applications we have discussed, YNAB, Monarch Money, and Copilot, do have a fee. Usually they're about $100 a year. Mm-hmm. What's important about that? First of all, people don't like paying. But what's important about that is if you're paying a fee, it's most likely because they want to protect your data. There was this application called Mint, which was great. That's the one that I started with. It was free. But they were providing your data to everybody else so they could send you offers for credit cards and whatnot. So again, now I like to be more protected. So I rather use these paying apps that I know are going to protect my data. And I feel more comfortable adding my bank information to them. And again, I just talked about Mint. So Mint merged with Credit Karma. Credit Karma is what I use to know my credit score, but apparently I haven't used the budgeting component of it, but apparently they merged and now it's just Credit Karma. Again, it's free, so they are most likely selling your data to vendors. And the one that I use, which is very the old school way, it's Excel. Again, I started using Mint once I figured what the trends were. I like Excel. I feel like it's easier for me to organize when it comes to saving. I haven't used the applications enough to say, okay, I'm going to put this money into savings, put this, do that. So I feel like Excel allows me to do that. But of course, your expenses might change on a monthly basis. So you might have to be checking your Excel sheet frequently. I personally check it about every 2 months. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Insurance goes up. I go into Excel, adjust that. So, the payment is this. For those minor things, of course, when I do see a bill that goes up, then I have to go back to Excel and make sure I adjust that there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spreadsheets, they're not for everybody, but but yeah, I'm a big fan of the apps because I think it's just very accessible for people. There's actually a study out there showing that if you have a budgeting app on your phone, you are less likely to overspend.
And that's great. And, again, the guy from YNAB started it from an Excel sheet that everybody wanted, and then he created this application. And one of the things that I really like about budgeting is putting your money to work, which I have heard that phrase many, many times. And what that means is, you look back at where your spending is going, and hopefully, you have some positive cash flow. Mm-hmm. With that positive cash flow, you can pretty much do whatever you want. Ideally, you're putting that money to work, meaning either investing or, like I said, I'm comfortable with savings accounts because they're at a high interest rate right now. But that money needs to be making money for you. So hopefully, in my Excel sheet, you'll see that at the end of the month, there's like $100 left over. But that's because a lot of the money that was the positive after my expenses are going to different savings accounts, brokerage accounts, and whatnot. So, that's where your positive cash flow should be going. Calculating your expenses, we already talked about it. You need to know what you're spending. And that way you can actually know your emergency fund. So we talked about, knowing what your expenses are in a monthly basis and then doing an emergency fund that is based out of 3-6 months of those expenses. And that's why Excel might not be the ideal form. The salaries for some vets varies a lot. Depending if you are on commission or production, you might have a great month or you might have a great quarter. And again, your check might vary. So, 1 month you receive X, second month you receive X, then all of a sudden in that quarter you receive a lump sum of $20,000. And that definitely changes your budget. I'm hoping that you have a stable number where when that $20,000 comes in from your production, you put it to work, you invest it, you put it into your student loan debt, whatever you need, just don't go ahead and spend it. Any other tips with the applications or comments on that?
Yeah, and so I get questions sometimes about, okay, well, like practically, how do I save? Like exactly how? And so it's like, okay, when we're talking about looking at the budget, so we're looking back over the past 2 or 3 months of spending. I like to look back over 3 months, especially since some vets have quarterly production checks. So you want to make sure that you've got production checks included in there when you're looking at your budget. And so you're going to want to look at your income and your expenses. And you're going to want to look over a quarter and actually average them out, because it's easy when you're making a budget, especially if you're using a spreadsheet, to say that every month is special because, right? It's like, oh, well, this wasn't a typical month because, in December I was traveling a lot to see family. And January, oh, well, it wasn't a typical month because I was paying off gifts. And then such and such happened the next month. And it's like every month is special because shouldn't translate to I can't make an accurate budget, right? So what we want to do is just look over the quarter. Like, yeah, you're probably going to have one of those months that you were traveling or something was happening that was different. And let's still average that out over a quarter, because you're probably going to have, 3 or 4 months out of the year that stick out that are different. And so I do think that looking at this over a quarterly basis not only kind of evens things out with the irregular income that most vets have, but then it also kind of evens it out with the ebb and flows in the spending as well. And so let's talk about a couple of different types of budget that we can have. So there's the zero-based budget, where you, quote, like, give every dollar a job. That's actually what the goal is for the YNAB app, is to give every dollar a job. And so it's actually not like, okay, I've got this money left over at the end of the month to spend. If you've got money left over at the end of the month, you're actually using it for a specific purpose. And so you're saying, okay, the money that I have, I'm going to put it towards saving, or I'm going to put it toward this other goal that I have. And so you're giving every dollar a specific job, even if you're actually saving it. Other thing I should throw in when we're talking about high yield savings accounts is some of them can be divided up into buckets where you've got different buckets for different goals. Ally is one that does that. The Capital One accounts also, there are ways of doing that. Or you can set up separate accounts where you've got one high yield savings account that's an emergency fund, and one that is a vacation fund, and one that is like an opportunity fund for a future business opportunity. So lots of different things, but that's your zero-based budget, though, is giving every dollar a job. And then there's another type of budget called the 50-30-20 budget. And so that's where you're taking 50% and you're saying, okay, that's going to be allocated toward needs. And when we talk about needs, that's like absolutely like essential expenses. And then 30% going to wants. And so when we say wants, we don't just mean like Amazon. Like, we do mean Amazon, but we don't just mean that. We mean anything that you're still spending money on that's not absolutely essential. And so controversially, like, even pets would go into the wants category in that case. And then savings, so 20% allocated to savings goals. And so when we're talking about that, we're talking about both short-term savings goals and then also long-term savings goals. So we're also talking about like that being like your vacation fund and, not just your retirement fund and those kind of longer-term savings goals. And so what are your thoughts on those two? A couple of different ways to look at a budget.
I think the zero-based budget, it's ideal, but I think it's difficult for people to follow that. Because people just don't give every dollar a job. They don't know what job to give it. I think the 50-30-20 is what most people want to hear. They want to hear, how much should I be spending on housing, on the needs? How much should I be spending on, whatever, household things that I want to buy on Amazon? And then the savings component, that's usually the biggest question I get, how much should I be saving? And I think, 20% is a great number. Ideally, you keep going up as you go. Most people start saving 5% at the beginning. I did an internship. It was like 3% that I was saving. Then, suddenly 5%, 6%. Hopefully you're increasing that on a yearly basis. But yeah, I think the 50, 30, 20 is what most people need to hear to, make it up in their mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then other things when we're thinking about a budget. So you've got fixed expenses and you've got variable expenses. And so your fixed expenses are the ones that are actually the most likely to make a bigger difference in your financial health long term. So if you think about like how much you're spending on a mortgage or on your rent, like that's a big decision. That's a big line item in your budget. And so if that ends up being, perhaps higher than it should be, that's going to have an impact on your overall financial health and being able to reach your goals. Same with transportation costs. If you buy a more expensive vehicle, then that's going to kind of limit some of the other options that you may have. It's going to take away a little bit of flexibility there. And then your variable expenses, those are the ones where you can make more of a difference month to month with your budget. Like those are usually the ones that somebody's looking at their budget and saying, oh gosh, there's some surprises there. I didn't know I was spending that much on DoorDash or on Amazon or on dining out, and I'm going to make some adjustments. Those are the ones that you're more likely to be able to make that month-to-month difference. And when you're looking at your budget, decide what's really essential for you and what's discretionary for you, right? Because like for some people, a gym membership might be an essential. And for some people, a gym membership might be an extra that they could cut out if something happened. What do you think about that, Willie?
For me, the gym is an essential.
I knew you would say that. Like CrossFit is on the essentials list. Yeah.
Yeah, that is essential. And again, going back to that 50, 30, 20, your salary will continue to go up. So what's discretionary might also go up. It's just a matter of, where do you want to spend your money? My main thing is make sure that you're saving and make sure that percentage is pretty fixed. The percentage, not the amount. The percentage is a kind of a fixed number for you for long term.
Yeah. And then the other thing that is a takeaway for some people from doing a budget, if they've never done one or if they haven't done one in a while, is subscriptions. And so a lot of people look and they're like, oh, I didn't even know I was still subscribed to Hulu or whatever. And they're looking back and going, I'm not really watching Disney Plus all that much, or I'm not really getting the value out of the BarkBox subscription or, the FabFitFun subscription or, whatever it might be. And so just eliminating some of those subscriptions that you're either not using or you don't value them as much as you used to. And those can add up.
Yeah, those can definitely add up. I arrived from my trip on Sunday and there was a box from a subscription that I forgot to unsubscribe. So I was very disappointed. But yeah, I think there's a lot of Instagram videos, when they're talking about budgeting and where people are spending money and they ask, you mentioned DoorDash. It's like, how much do you think you spend on DoorDash? And people are way off on their expenses.
Yes, they are. Yeah. Well, that's one reason I like the apps too, is like you're spending on the apps. That doesn't lie. What you put in your Excel, you might be able to make excuses about, if you're not putting the actual expenses and you're putting more of like, this is my ideal budget, but those apps don't lie. So what are all the things that we can do with our, let's say we're looking at our budget and we've got extra money. What are the options for what to do with that, Willie?
You can save it. So again, give it a job. You can invest it. So again, when we talk about saving, it's a savings account, which is easily accessible, I guess. You can invest it, which usually it's more of a long-term goal. Again, that could be in retirement accounts or brokerage accounts. Or you can spend it. I don't have any issue with you spending the money as long as that percentage that you're saving is fixed. So if you already save your 20%, go ahead and spend whatever you want. And that's how I feel. I have a fixed savings budget of around 30%. And sometimes I have leftover and I put more into savings, but most of the time I just want to spend it.
Yeah. And I think giving yourself permission, once you've hit your savings goals and you've got extra money left over, give yourself permission to spend it, go on a vacation, buy a nice purse once in a while. It's okay to spend a little bit and enjoy a little bit of that money. And then what if you find that you're behind?
Mostly that's why the budget is there. You have to go back and figure out where is the money going. If you do need to pay your bills, which again, I'm going to talk about credit cards. You don't want to pay 20% on interest. So you better pay it off that month. So you might need to dip into your savings account. Hopefully you don't have to dip into your emergency fund, but you will have to pull it from your savings. You can borrow money, which again, with my mentality after vet school that I had already borrowed $200,000, I don't want to borrow more money unless it's for a house. I think this is where most people find out what they're spending and say, man, I really need to figure out how to trim my expenses. Maybe it's short term, maybe it's long term. And you talked about fixed expenses before. There's some fixed expenses that could be very detrimental, like a nice house. Right now, housing is so expensive that rent is really significant. It used to be like, if you pay 30% of your salary and rent is fine. Some people are spending more than that nowadays. And then the car, if you want to go and splurge, which I see that a lot when you graduate vet school and you get a sign-on bonus. And then it's like, I'm going to buy that BMW I always wanted. And it's like, that BMW is costing you $800 a month. That is very detrimental.
Yeah, that's tough. So something to really think about when you're looking at those bigger ticket items, and sometimes I'll see, folks with a boat loan and, and credit cards and, we can get out of this, but, we may be making some decisions that are not super fun. So sometimes I get the question of okay, but really, my income's super irregular. I'm a relief vet or I'm an emergency vet that's got kind of lower base salary, but then I get these huge production checks and I don't think I can budget. And so let's talk to those folks. So we've got, for the emergency vets, maybe you've got these big production checks that you're getting. Nice problem to have, right? You've got this smaller base salary that you're working with. Maybe you're using your base salary to actually do your budgeting. And then when you get those bigger production checks, whether they're monthly or quarterly, when you're getting those bigger production checks, you're saying, okay, well, these are my financial goals that I've got that are in addition to just my regular everyday spending that's happening on a monthly basis. And I'm going to take that production check and I'm going to assign it to those goals. And so it's going to, $5,000 of it is going to go to the emergency fund, and $1,000 of it's going to go in the vacation fund, things like that. So taking that money and actually assigning it to a specific goal is one way of doing that. For the relief vets, so ways that you can do that. So you could look at whatever was your lowest income month from the past year. And when I say lowest income month, that's not going to be if you took a whole month of vacation and made nothing, but your lowest month of income when you were actually working as a relief vet. So maybe you take that and you say, okay, that's going to be what I'm going to base my essential expenses on, right? And then you take all of your expenses in this case, and including your goals, your savings goals, and just list them out in order of importance and say, okay, well, when I get extra money, and it won't really be extra money, it'll just be your regular income, right? That'll be, higher than that lowest income month from the past year. When you get that additional money, you would be using it to allocate to those other goals that you have, or those other even regular expenses that you have. For example, maybe you need more scrubs, but you're going to buy those scrubs in a month where your income is a little bit higher. It's not in your lowest income month, for example. So there are ways of getting around that, even if you feel like your income is super irregular.
Yeah. And again, that's why I personally think you should be using an app. If you tell me, I just started a new job a few months ago, my salary is irregular. Hey, you have an app? Let's go ahead and check and ask it to average out the last 4 months on that new job.
Yeah.
So that is your income. and we can use that as a number.
Mm-hmm.
I like to talk about this number because once I have reached a lot of my goals, at least in the budget part. So again, I'm putting my money to work. A number that I enjoy following, and most of these apps will give you this number. It's net worth. So you have your assets and your debts, and then so you track your assets minus those, and then you get this net worth, meaning what you're worth. And you see this a lot with actors, and it's like, oh, their net worth is $100 million. So that's a number that I actually follow on a monthly basis. And I don't use an app, so I do it by Excel, which is unfortunate because I have to put numbers into it every month. But again, I like tables. But as long as that number is going up, for me, it means I'm doing a good job with my money. And I don't budget that much anymore because fortunately for me and my wife, we both make good money. So now as long as I'm putting my, we mentioned the 20%, in my case, it's about 30% of savings. As long as I know that money's going to those allocated savings account, brokerage accounts or whatnot, I feel very comfortable. And because I'm saving that amount, in all of my paychecks, my net worth is usually going up. And you do a lot of financial planning. Do people ask you about that number?
Oh, about net worth?
Yeah.
So, yes. And we have some tools that we use to track net worth. And it's really cool to look at projections and see how people's net worth is going to increase over time. And we have ways of calculating even with student loans and like looking at, okay, minus student loans, what is your net worth? And okay, then taking into account, okay, well, what happens with your overall like actual net worth once you hit forgiveness and how that changes. And so it's really interesting to see. But the thing that really is going to impact you longer term, because certainly student loans are a big stressor for a lot of veterinarians, but really your savings rate is going to be what impacts you long term and sets you up to have more options in the future. It's not really your student debt, it's your savings rate.
Yep, that is correct. And so for me, I put money into my to my wife's student loan debt and then my savings. So my debt is decreasing and my assets are also increasing. So again, that helps with that number increasing. And I see this more on the medical side. They also have a lot of student loan. When they say, oh, I'm back to broke, which means that either they paid off their loan and now, they're pretty much at net worth zero, or they have enough assets that can mitigate the debt and their number is zero. So once you get to zero, you're back to broke. And now hopefully you become rich. Reach whatever goal you have, becoming a millionaire, a multimillionaire. But I like when people say I'm back to broke. That's for me a cool thing to say. And I already achieved that, and it's pretty exciting. Some trends with budgeting that, I'm very passionate about this because I like to travel hack. So it's really important to know where your money goes. That can help you in planning. In my case for travel hacking, where am I spending money? I have rent. That is my biggest expense, rent. Am I getting any benefit out of renting? Yeah, I don't have to deal with a lot of stuff of owning a house. I also get points. There's a credit card that gives you points on rent, and I highly benefit of that. Similar to restaurants, there's credit cards that I use them for the restaurants. They give me either cash back. There's two things to look at. It's cash back or points, and those points you probably will use them for travel hacking. Again, I want the credit card that's giving me the best bang for my buck. Again, I like to travel hack, but I have talked to people that they're like, I just stay at home. I like being at home. So in those cases, hey, let's look at the best cashback card for you, meaning you swipe it and you get, let's say, 2-3% back on whatever you spend. And that can be significant as long as you're paying off your credit card every month. Otherwise, the interest is going to mitigate any benefit you're getting from the credit card. That's what I really like, trend-wise. Where am I spending my money? What credit card should I be using? I have plenty of credit cards. And again, I do not carry a balance, but I just want to maximize the amount of points. You can also, again, if you're a cashback person, you can also maximize the amount of cashback that you're getting. What else, Meredith? What have we got with different trends to follow when you're budgeting?
Yeah, well, one of the things to keep in mind, especially because a lot of veterinarians are really type A, right? Like they want to get everything perfect the first time. And it's like, spoiler alert, it's not going to be perfect the first time. And that's okay, right? So just knowing that you should expect some adjustments over the first 3 months that you're budgeting, because there's always going to be those very irregular expenses that come up, once or twice a year that you're going to forget to budget for. And so it's okay to expect that you're going to have those adjustments, and then just, you perfect it over time, right? And so let's also talk about what happens if your budget just isn't working. I'm trying to do this and it's just not working for me, and the numbers are not coming out the way that I want them to. And so in that case, you may need to either lower your expenses or increase your income, or both, right? If your budget is set up to where you're just not coming out ahead. And so reducing expenses. So geographic arbitrage is one way to reduce expenses. And I think Willie could probably speak to that, moving from California to Florida last year.
Everybody keeps saying, oh, California is so expensive. I'm actually spending more money in Florida. I'm not sure it's because, my wife's salary increased and, we have more money, but we're paying more in rent. I don't see much of a difference in restaurants or bars or whatnot. The only difference that there is there's no income tax. So certainly there is it was like a 6-7% California income tax that it was gone. I never saw that money. They also have, I think, a 1% disability in California. So again, about 8% of my salary, I was not seeing it. So in that case, yes, California is more expensive, but a lot of cities are becoming very expensive. So for me right now, that arbitrage might be for remote places, which I'll have a hard time living in a remote place. But certainly you can move. You can move, suburbs, whatnot. It depends. One of the biggest factors for, I don't think it's depression, but for disliking your job is the commute. So that's also, very important. Do you need to live in the city? And if that's the case, then yeah, your expenses might be higher on the housing part. But if you can figure out how to, go outside of the city and the suburbs, places for cheaper, remote working, asking your employer to provide remote work. I think we had discussed this before where, people hate records. And can you offer one day at the house where they work on the records? Like, I think I seen that in some vets that recently they used to be working 4 days a week. Now they're working 3, and one day is pretty much records, and help troubleshoot any calls that the front desk receives. I've seen a few contracts with that now. So again, if you can lower your expenses somehow, that would be beneficial. Or you can go ahead and be an entrepreneur and start thinking on how you can increase your income. I love telling people, figure out how to increase your income.
Yeah, and lots of different ways, that vets can increase their income, right? So you can pick up extra shifts. You can work emergency shifts, vaccine clinics. Willie has worked a few vaccine clinics in his day. Starting a side hustle. And that could be anything. Like that could be something that's not related to vet med at all. That is something that maybe it starts out as a hobby that you just do for enjoyment. And then you figure out a way to make it a business. And so lots of different things that can be done kind of on a smaller scale than that. Just, picking up some extra cash maybe for putting toward a vacation or something like that would be to cash in on your old electronics. Like most people have paperweights just sitting around their house, that's like an old phone or maybe even an old computer that they might be able to trade in for some cash. So that's kind of like the modern yard sale in a way,
Yeah. I have a hard time selling stuff, but another thing that I done this quite a bit, and I'm trying to make sure it's to merge things, and I'm talking about actual cash. So I have $600 in Venmo, $1,000 in PayPal. I rarely use that money for anything, and it's just like it's sitting there, wasting. So you can merge those, figure, hey, you know what? I have in that case, $1,600 in this accounts that I rarely use. Merge them up and use them for something, either expend them or putting on a savings account to get some interest out of them.
Yeah, and those companies, they're investing that excess money that you've got sitting in there. There was a story that I read about Starbucks. You know how a lot of people put like $25 at a time on their Starbucks card. So Starbucks is taking all of that money. And if you think about it like, nationally and globally, how much money that is, they're investing with that. and it's actually like a significant revenue source for them.
That's correct. And, again, I like to do the credit card points game. Sometimes I have such a large balance and I'm like, the points are actually devaluating. So I'm just wasting money not using them. So certainly, again, it's just that mindset of, I have this, why not use it?
Yeah. And then the other thing, and I know we've touched on this in other podcasts before, is other ways to increase your income kind of longer term would be learning more about negotiation or leadership or business, or taking some extra courses to develop a new medical skill or surgical skill. And I mean, that could have a huge impact on your income longer term.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that one. Nowadays, I think employers are being more flexible. So if you're a person that likes dental, I hate dental. So if you come in and say you want to do all the dentals, I don't really practice anymore, but if I was in a practice, I'd be the happiest person. Like, yes, please go ahead and do those. And, for me, I like to do space and neuters. I'd be happy to do all of the soft tissue stuff. Like, I actually enjoy that. So certainly, if you have some special skills, endoscopy, ultrasound, whatnot, I'm pretty sure they're going to help a lot. You have to express that interest too, because the employers are not going to know that. Mm-hmm. So I feel really comfortable about how we went over having a cash flow plan or a budget. Again, I think people don't like the word budgeting, but it is important to know where your money is going. No matter if you use an application or your own tool like myself, but you should have a budget, or as Meredith likes to call it, a cash flow plan.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, it's been great talking with you today about budgeting, Willie. So if you like these topic-based podcasts, let us know. Feel free to, of course, subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a review if you like the podcast. That's probably the greatest compliment you can give the podcast, is writing a review. And we'll be happy to do more of these. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you liked this episode, click the follow or subscribe button. Until next time, take care and continue your path to financial success.
The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered legal or financial advice. Consult with a legal or financial professional before making any investment decisions.